Hello, I'm Scott McGregor. Welcome to Railway Adventures across Australia. And welcome to Sydney, capital of New South Wales, the spectacular starting point for our railway journey across the continent, coast to coast. From here, beside the Pacific Ocean, we're going all the way to Perth and the Indian Ocean, travelling on the mighty Indian Pacific. And along the way, taking a grand detour inland on another famous train, the Ghan, from Adelaide to Alice Springs and the very heart of Australia. Our journey on these trains will take us across some of the most harsh, unforgiving and spectacular terrain on Earth. These are the lines, built on hardship and toil, that turned a continent into a nation, overcoming isolation and opening up the vast inland to miners, pastoralists and other pioneers brave enough to go there. We'll be following the trail of history, stopping off at cities and remote towns, and some towns that never quite made it, enjoying trains from another age and hearing about the legends that survived them. There's always a whiff of adventure in the air as the Indian Pacific leaves Sydney. We've got passengers from all walks of life. People going back to Perth, tourists, backpackers, and people like me, just going along for the ride. This is an epic journey of 4,352 kilometres, 3 days and 3 nights. First, nosing out through the city suburbs, heading for the Blue Mountains west of Sydney, and then on to the big country. Overnight to our first stop, Broken Hill. First-class passengers on the Indian Pacific have their own restaurant and a sumptuous menu that features a unique Australian flavour. For example, on tonight's menu, we have beef fillet Nantawarra, a grilled fillet filled with natural spinach pesto and a bush tomato salsa. Not bad. And to cap that off, how about warm macadamia honey tart for dessert? These days, the journey is very civilised, but it wasn't always like this. Until the later decades of this century, there was no air conditioning, and not even the same size tracks all the way. You had to change trains 4 times. This was before the standard gauge railway was completed in 1970. This event ended a bewildering and sorry story that plagued and divided Australia for over 100 years. It's a good story too, which we're going to delve into in more detail a little later. Ha! While I've been dining, the conductor's been busy. Well, good night then. See you in the morning. The first sight in the morning, the extraordinary Menindee Lakes. They're part of the Great Darling River system. Burke and Wills stayed here in 1860 on their ill-fated journey north. Situated in the Barrier Ranges, Broken Hill is known as Australia's Silver City, the centre of the outback, an oasis of comfort in the desert. It's all true. Ore was discovered in Broken Hill in 1883 when a boundary rider named Charles Raspe literally tripped over the lode, as the silver, lead and zinc is known, sticking out of the ground. He thought it was tin at first and pegged a lease on what was known as the Broken Hill. Broken Hill could once lay claim to be one of the richest ore bodies in the world. But like all good things, one day it must run out. On present predictions, they estimate there's about 15 years of ore left to mine. I love the street names. They proclaim the city's mining heritage in no uncertain terms. The landscape around Broken Hill, though beautiful, can be harsh and unforgiving. This is Daydream Mine, one of the earliest in the area. It was first worked in 1882 by some very tough little Cornish miners. Now remember, that's before Charles Raspe pegged out the claim at Broken Hill. Kevin White looks after the Daydream lease. He has a fund of knowledge about the miners who lived and worked here.
Yep. The actual main street and the township of Daydream was up over the bend there. And the early writings talk about it having a general store, a butcher shop, a bakery, a police station, and 2 pubs. They also talk of it having 10 ladies in the night.
Is that right?
In its heyday, there were 500 residents at Daydream, which included 150 men who worked the mine and about 20 boys, known as picky boys. They were between 10 and 15 years old, and their job was to haul the rock out of the mine by hand and then pick over it for the valuable ore. It was a tough job, and living conditions were pretty basic. The miners lived in Hessian tents or rough shelters they dug out of the ground called mire-mires.
What, he just crawled in there in the evening and slept?
Yep. You can imagine the sort of conditions they lived. They would have frozen in winter and cooked in summer.
The miners worked 12 hours a day down the mine for 6 days a week, so they probably didn't have much trouble sleeping anyway. As you walk into this mine, you realise that the shafts were dug before the days of pneumatic drills and other mechanised mining tools. In all, the miners dug over 4 kilometres of shafts on 4 different levels, using picks, shovels and dynamite.
How deep does it go?
288 feet in the old terms. Yeah.
The ore seam you see here is 500 million years old, and the host rock, so the geologists tell Kevin, is even older. In this one stope alone, they pulled out 96,000 tonnes of rock and put 72,000 tonnes of it back again.
Why did they do that? Why did they put it all back?
They were mostly the Cornish, and the Cornish were noted for safety, fill them back in to hold their backs up. Here's an old picky boy box, one boy at the front, one at the rear, and they'd carry that when it was full of ore rock to the closest shaft. Unload the bags of ore that they've loaded, and then the boys would go back and pick more ore.
Kevin says the boys could only work for about 2 years before their eyes became so infected with conjunctivitis they could hardly see anymore. Then, at the age of about 12 or 15, they were finished in the mines for good, which is probably just as well, because the adult miners, who also suffer the dusty conditions and poor diet, rarely lived beyond the age of 40. Mining has a predictable quality about it. Ore gets discovered, a town springs up out of nowhere and prospers, then the ore runs out. This is the ghost town of Silverton, just 27 kilometres up the road from Broken Hill. It was booming in 1885. In fact, everyone thought it was going to be bigger than Broken Hill. It even gave its name to an enterprising little private railway company called the Silverton Tramway Company. Enterprising because they saw an opportunity that the New South Wales Railways had missed. At the time, the Silverton ore was being carted over the border to Coburn in South Australia by bullock wagon. From there, the ore went on to Port Pirie by rail. The New South Wales government didn't want to push their railway line the extra distance from Broken Hill to pick up the Silverton ore and take it to the smelters in New South Wales. But The owners of the Silverton Tramway Company saw value in building a line from Silverton to the South Australian border, as this costly cutting just outside Silverton attests. Sadly though, by the time the line was finished, so was Silverton. The ore had run out, and instead of stopping here, the line continued right through the main street and on to Broken Hill, where the mining boom was in full swing. Time to leave Broken Hill and push on into South Australia and the next stage of our journey from coast to coast. You may remember, when we began our journey on the Indian Pacific, I said it wasn't until 1970 that the line was standardised from Sydney to Perth. The different sized railway tracks had divided the country for over 100 years. Just how much is best explained at our next stop, Peterborough, because it's here that the sorry tale of the break of gauge is most graphically illustrated. We have to walk up to the old roundhouse to really get a good idea of what the country was up against. Right from the very beginning, the development of the railway in this country has not always been well coordinated between the states.
For example, when it came time to decide the width of the track the train should run on, that's the gauge I'm talking about, everybody virtually went their own way and built what they liked. It'd be fair to say that the self-interests of the states overrode the desires of national unity. Sound familiar?
In concluding this report, I am desirous of alluding to the fact that there is a diversity of gauges that exist between this and the other colonies of Australia. The magnitude of the evils that must ultimately arise at no distant period and be entailed upon the future inhabitants of the colonies from this circumstance can hardly be overrated. And I would therefore submit that it is a question deserving the attentions of the various governments. Gotha K. Mann, Railway Commissioner, New South Wales Railways, 1856.
It was a mess all round. It certainly hindered our economic development. This is one of the famous South Australian triple gauge yards, where goods came in on one gauge and had to be transferred over onto another. In Peterborough, there are no less than 3 gauges. On this turntable, there's broad, standard and narrow gauge. It made carting goods by rail very inefficient, and you can see how road transport soon came to dominate the freight industry.
When the Peterborough yards were closed in 1993, they handed everything over to the local train society, better known as Steamtown. Today they run a very enjoyable train ride using this old West Australian Government Railways W-class loco and carriages from the old Ghan. We're heading up towards the beautiful rolling hills of the mid-north.
Hey, having a good time? Fun, isn't it?
In good years, farming here is very good, but you get a couple of poor seasons and, well, it's reflected in the country, isn't it? With this wind whistling across the countryside, it sort of reminds me of the Badlands of Montana. The train turns round at a lonely little place called Blackrock. The old pub, now a cafe and a restaurant, boasts the only cappuccino machine in the South Australian mid-north. The coffee's good too. So if you're ever up this way, drop in and go for a ride. Adelaide. I've got a few things planned for us here before we head north on the Ghan. South Australia was the youngest colony in the nation. It wasn't settled with convicts and actually came about through some very intensive planning. Hence, unlike Sydney, Adelaide is a very ordered city. These days, it combines all the vitality of a large modern city with an easygoing, relaxed lifestyle. It also has a wonderful railway station.
Now this is what I call a railway station. It's classic American style.
It was built in the 1920s by Commissioner William Alfred Webb, a successful American railwayman hired by the state government to rejuvenate a declining and worn-out rail system. Unfortunately, through building the station, Mr. Webb nearly sent the state broke because the size and the facilities in it are more suited to a large city like Philadelphia than a small place like Adelaide.
Never mind. It's here now.
Except for the small local domestic train service, they don't use this place as a real railway station anymore. So what do you do with all this extra space? You turn it into a casino, of course. They've done a good job, though, in retaining the feel and character of the old railway station. This restaurant used to be the Commissioner's office. Not a bad size office, when you consider it was converted without knocking down any walls. One very interesting train that does still leave from Adelaide Railway Station is the Bluebird to the Barossa Valley. Now, why didn't somebody think of this a long time ago? A train trip to the Barossa, the South Australian homeland of fine wine and good living. The Bluebird fleet was once the mainstay of the state's country passenger services. Withdrawn from service in 1991, they lay idle until someone had the brilliant idea of providing this day tripper service. Now everyone can have a lovely day in the valley, admiring the scenery, taking in the old German culture and sampling the wares. And you don't have to toss a coin to see who's going to drive the car home either. But back to the railway. And how's this for grace and style? State of the art in steam at the time. The mighty 520 class engines were built in South Australia between 1939 and 1952. Urgently required for the war effort at first, the most unique feature of these powerful broad gauge engines was their very attractive streamlining. The 520s were very successful, and when the diesels started taking over in the 1950s, these were kept in service. In fact, they were the last mainline passenger steam engines in South Australia. This 520 belongs to Steam Ranger, who run a number of tourist train services from Mount Barker to destinations on the Fleurieu Peninsula just south of Adelaide. This one's called the Southern Encounter. The Cockle train, another one of Steam Ranger's services, does a short return trip from Victor Harbour to Goolwa on Lake Alexandrina. Part of the line travels along the foreshore between Victor Harbour and Port Elliot, practically in the sandhills, which is quite a unique experience, then through rolling green pastures to Goolwa. Back to Adelaide and Keswick Station, the departure point for our great adventure north on the Ghan. Truly one of the world's great trains, with a wealth of history attached to it.
Hi Ben, how are you?
Very well, thanks.
Good, we're travelling in C1 and 2. It's the first cabin in on the right.
The Udna Data car, no less.
The data car. Excellent, there we go. It's
Looks
just
good.
through this way. Thank you, Steve.
Our journey from Adelaide to Alice Springs takes 20 hours, 1,555 kilometres, through some of the world's most inhospitable but beautiful countryside.
This particular service is so popular that Great Southern Railways have decided to double the length of the train. It's 30 carriages all up, 2 club cars, 2 restaurant cars. There's 1,500 tonnes, 350 people on the train. It's a popular train.
Like the Indian Pacific, the Ghan offers the same standard of service and facilities. Comfortable sleepers, you can sit up if you want, a lounge and a restaurant. As I said earlier, there's a wealth of history attached to this train. It's all about tough, adventurous people and their determination to tame the harsh environment and conquer the tyranny of distance. The line we're on now is not the original Ghan line. This is a relatively new one that opened in 1980. The original line followed the inland trail of the explorer John McDougall Stewart and the old Afghan camel trains, along the base of the Flinders Ranges and south of Lake Eyre, but it had to be shifted because it was prone to flooding in the wet season. The old line was started in 1878 with the grand intention of opening up the empty interior, but progress was slow. It wasn't until 1929 that it finally reached Alice Springs. The train takes its name from the Afghan cameleers, who did so much to open up this country.
They moved the line for good reason, but it's on the old line where the good stories lie. And that's what I plan to do when I get to Alice, is trace the old line all the way back down to Port Augusta.
That's not to say that this journey lacks adventure for the modern traveller. I mean, it's a wonder anything can survive in this country with its broad salt lakes and flat, dry landscape. Alice Springs can safely be called the capital of inland Australia. Although it only has around 20,000 inhabitants, the town exercises a fascination beyond its size. Originally a relay station for the overland telegraph which linked Adelaide and Darwin, the town was named after Alice, the wife of the Postmaster General of South Australia, Sir Charles Todd. Whichever way you turn in the Red Centre, you keep coming back to the landscape. Seared by the hot sun and gnawed by millions of years of rain and wind, it's a special place in which all but the most elemental features have nearly been scorched to extinction. It used to be known as the dead heart of Australia. That's never been true. There's an abundance of life in this region. As I said, when the Ghan came to the centre, the line followed a great exploration route, simply because it was known as an easy way through. But they hadn't reckoned on the devastating effect of the wet season, which turned the Ghan into something of a legend. This is the Old Ghan Preservation Society, just outside of town. They've got about 25 k's of the original Old Ghan track. It runs down to a place called Ewanninga Siding. Other than this and a few remnants, there's not much left until you get down to Quorn, roughly 1,200 kilometres away, in the lower Flinders Ranges. It's an irony that such a desolate area could be so flood-prone. But it's a fact. Track washouts were common. A 2-day journey could turn into 2 weeks. Drivers had to carry guns to shoot wild goats so they could feed the passengers. Sometimes the train travelled so slowly, there are stories of people hopping down to pick wildflowers which sprang up everywhere after a good soak. In the end, the line really destroyed itself because it was just too costly to keep open. When the line was closed, they pulled up the track, which under normal circumstances would have given us a problem. But luckily, we can draw on the experiences of the past to get us out of this one. These two will get us down to Port Augusta okay. The route of the old line passes through some very evocative place names on the way. Oodnadatta, Algie Buckner, William Creek, Coward Springs, Maree, Farina, Lyndhurst, Quorn. Some of these places are just ruins now, abandoned long ago. Others are still viable townships, but nothing like the hives of activity they were when the railway came through.
The railway finally reached Oodnadatta in 1891. Considering construction started in Port Augusta 13 years earlier, it took a fair while to get there.
Up until 1929, the only way to go from Oodnadatta to Alice Springs was a 6-day camel ride. For 40 years, Oodnadatta was a hive of activity, the railhead for all points north. Even though the line has gone, there's plenty of evidence to show where it went. This is the Algie Buckner Bridge. It's 571 metres long, was fabricated in England. The interesting thing about this bridge is that it was never meant to be here in the first place. The intention was to ship it out to Australia and use it to span the River Murray. But when it arrived, they found it was too short, so it ended up here at Algie Buckner. Now the only thing missing is the old Ghan itself.
William Creek. This would have to be one of the most famous watering holes in the country.
Where else can you park your plane in the main street and stroll into the pub for a cool drink? The pub was built in 1887 to service the old Ghan Railway. Recently, it was deemed so important to our outback history that it was placed on the National Heritage List. Inside, the place is decorated with the mementos of the many visitors who've quenched their thirsts here. Some of these souvenirs go back well over 50 years. But publican Malcolm Anderson has his own theory about why the William Creek Hotel is so unique.
The total of the pub that you can see from the outside has never been burnt down. Historically speaking, I'd say that most pubs in Australia, old pubs in Australia, have been burnt down a couple of times. This place is what you see now is what it was in 1887.
Neither the railways nor the pastoralists could survive in this climate without water. For years on end, there's none to be found on the surface. So they looked underground, to the largest underground water supply in the world, the Great Artesian Basin. Camels don't need much water to survive. That's one of the reasons they've done so well out here. In 1866, 100 camels and 31 cameleers arrived in Port Augusta. Although the men were known as Afghans, they actually came from all over the Middle East. Their numbers were small, but the cameleers' influence on opening up the outback was enormous. They helped construct the overland telegraph and the railways, and they carried supplies for the miners and the pastoralists. Sadly, as the railways and then road transport took over, the working days of the camel became numbered. They ended up being a pest, and many camels were shot. Today, wild camels still roam the bush, but at our next destination, we'll see how some have found a new purpose in life. Camel racing. We're just in time for the Maree Camel Cup. The Maree Cup is an annual event that attracts riders and camels from all over Australia. In fact, camel racing is becoming increasingly popular all around the country. These are bush camels, which means they're not all that disciplined and they haven't done a lot of work. When they get out on the track and the starter's gun goes off, anything can happen, and does. I think we should find out what makes these people want to do this. After all, it's not exactly horse racing, is it?
I ride racehorses and stuff. You sort of ride the old camels for a bit of adrenaline pump.
The Maree races are run by the locals, with all the proceeds going to the community.
Wally's wandering all over the field like a mad woman. Wally, come on, keep it straight, Wally, and you'll get somewhere. Wally's going back, Wally's out of it.
The prize money at these events is nowhere near what you'd find in horse racing. But for the locals, that doesn't matter too much. Out here, it's a matter of making your own fun And I think that's the real point behind the Maree Camel Cup. Like the camel trains, the railways came and went in Maree. Not much happens here now, but these two old diesels attest to a time when the town was a major railhead on the line. Butch Bijar started as a sweeper and ended up being the last station master here at Maree.
When it's really busy times, you have trains on either side of these lines, one on each side. And
this is the amazing thing of Maree. It was actually the change of gauge, wasn't
everything.
it? Everything.
Everything from the food, from a tin of peas on the gan to a leg of ham or leg of beef, whatever, went over. Everything was transferred across.
As far as life here was concerned, what was it like?
Oh, it was a ball here. The
Yeah?
place was really a big place. There's a lot of people around, always heaps of different nationalities, and
Oh, yeah,
so on. It was really good.
And so that makes for interesting times, doesn't it? You can see just how vulnerable this line was in a flood. After a heavy downpour, the water would just roar through here. I've seen a photo of this bridge with the water up to where I'm sitting. Further down the line, there's another example of just how harsh this country can be.
This is Farina, another former railhead. 300 people called Farina home once. The original plan, when it was settled, was to grow wheat, but the climate wasn't suitable. When I come to a place like this, I can't help wondering about the people who once lived here, why they came here and what they did. Bits and pieces of their lives are still strewn all over the place. The old car body over there, a bedstead. Even the old baker's oven is still here.
Coming up to Quorn.
We're near the end of the old Gan line now, but not the end of our journey coast to coast. There's still plenty of that to come. Like Maree, Quorn is now a quiet country town, nestling in the lower Flinders Ranges of South Australia's mid-north. Quorn is a child of the steam age and the home of the famous Pitchy Ritchie Railway. The Pitchy Ritchie Railway is the only other section of the old Gan line left. It runs from Quorn down to Woolshed Flat through the Pitchy Ritchie Pass, a distance of about 20 kilometres. The folks at Pitchy Ritchie are a dedicated bunch of volunteers who, in addition to providing a great train ride, work really hard to preserve the history and culture of the old Gan. Well, We did it. Alice Springs to Port Augusta, down the old GAN line. Now all I've got to do is wait for the Indian Pacific to come through and take me west across the Nullarbor. Looking out from the train, we seem to be the only living things in this country. The Nullarbor Plain is 4 times the size of Belgium, which somehow doesn't surprise me when you consider we're entering a state that at 2.5 million square kilometres takes up almost 1/3 of the continent. The trip from Port Augusta to Kalgoorlie alone is 1,880 kilometres. This section of track between Uldea and Loongarna is the longest length of straight track anywhere in the world. 478 kilometres without the hint of a curve. Just hearing these statistics helps you appreciate what a feat it was to build the line across this vast, baking hot expanse of country. In these times of jet air travel, the significance of the event is lost. But back in 1912, when the first sod was turned at Port Augusta Station to start the building of the line, it was a momentous event. At last, the tyranny of distance and isolation between east and west was to be conquered. At the time, there was a rail network of sorts around the country, even though it was a hopeless tangle of different sized tracks. But there was one daunting gap: the vast empty stretch between Port Augusta and Kalgoorlie. Construction began when 2 crews set out, one from Kalgoorlie, the other one from Port Augusta, to drive the line through. Over 3,000 workers battled through this incredibly harsh landscape, laying an estimated 90,000 sleepers. Every single item required, including coal for the locos, water and sleepers for the track, had to be brought in, either by camel or by train on the advancing rail line. On October the 17th, 1917, in a remarkable feat of surveying and engineering, the 2 construction teams made an historic meeting at Uldea, 1,001 kilometres east of Kalgoorlie, exactly as planned. The line across the Nullarbor was built. We're coming up to one of the most remote towns on the planet, Cook. Named after a former Australian Prime Minister, the late Sir Joseph Cook, it's almost at the halfway mark of the Trans-Australian Railway. Cook's sole reason for existence is to service the railway. Changeover train crews rest here, water is taken on board, and track crews still work out of Cook on a temporary basis. Overall though, the place is not as busy as it used to be, because these days, with advances in track technology and the efficiencies of modern train catering, not so many people need to be permanently based in Cook. In fact, the town is in the process of being wound up completely. Today, the permanent population of Cook is Bruce, his wife Michelle, and their baby, plus 11 very energetic guard dogs and 1 bemused kangaroo. So you work for the railways?
We do, mate, yeah, we're the caretakers of Cook, yep.
The caretakers of Cook?
Yep.
Gee, it's like meeting the mayor and mayoress of the town, I suppose. So when the train pulls in, how many people get off?
Well, you get, you know, about 400, up to 400. That's when the wildflowers are on. It's an extra long train then.
And they all get off and have a look around?
They're all off, mate, yep.
So they've got a couple of hours and then they're all back on the train again?
Yep.
And you're back to your peace and quiet?
Yep, back to until the next Indian Pacific.
Although lacking permanent residence, the place still gets its fair share of rail traffic because it's not only the Indian Pacific that uses the line. Goods trains pass through at all times of day and night. And what do Bruce and Michelle, their railway guests, and blow-ins like us do to while away the hours until the next train arrives? Why, we play golf. What else would you do in the middle of the desert?
Ah, good shot.
Nice. Yeah, you played this game before, huh?
A gruelling 6 holes is this. Sure, it's pretty flat, and the water traps don't often come into play, but the sand is unforgiving. Oh. 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 The Indian Pacific will continue to stop here, but the town's days are numbered. We were fortunate to see it like this because in time, Cook will be nothing but a memory. Kalgoorlie, as a gold mining town, was once more important to the West Australian economy than Perth. It looks pretty civilised now, but the city is about as close as you can get to the Wild West. Gold was found here in 1892. By the late 1890s, upwards of 1,400 miners were arriving here each week. The rush was on. Once, turrets and deep mine shafts featured in the landscape around Kalgoorlie. It was the only way of extracting the gold back then. Today, a vast hole in the ground dominates the district they call the Golden Mile. The Finnieston Pit is Australia's largest gold mine. This one mine has replaced the 1,200 different mining companies that once existed here. It produces around 650,000 ounces of gold per year. Herbert Hoover, a young American fortune seeker, later to find fame in the political arena, lived and worked in Kalgoorlie for a number of years. He made quite a name for himself as a mine manager, and he enjoyed the social life around town. He was a familiar face at one of the local watering holes, and there's an interesting testament to his patronage. Whoa. This magnificent mirror was a gift from Herbert Hoover to the Palace Hotel. He had it shipped out from America. It was in appreciation for a friendship he had here with a barmaid. Mighty fine friendship, I'd say. After an illustrious career as a mine manager in Australia and China, he was a millionaire before he turned 40. In 1929, Herbert Hoover became the 31st President of the United States of America. Once gold was discovered in Kalgoorlie, two things were essential for its survival: fuel and water. The area around Kalgoorlie was once heavily forested, but the demand for timber was high, and soon the immediate supply was exhausted. Timber companies quickly set up a network of railway tracks, stretching out like a giant cobweb for up to 120 kilometres around Kalgoorlie. Upward of 2,500 tonnes of wood could be delivered back to Kal daily by these little trains. Hundreds of thousands of tonnes altogether. It wasn't long before the wood ran out and the trains disappeared completely. Australian bushmen and miners are generally a law unto themselves. One of their most unique inventions and pastimes would have to be the game of two-up.
The Tuup School in Cal is a local icon where miners, locals and tourists alike can have some fun, increase their kitty or contribute to someone else's. Money changes hands every time two heads or two tails land on the asphalt circle. Everyone is welcome, with the spinner, the coin tosser, trying to throw heads every time. Come in, spinner. Now you know where the term comes from. It's time to head west again, 595 kilometres, to the end of the line. Perth, the end of our epic journey. This skyline looks a lot different from that of February 1970, when the first standard gauge train from Sydney pulled in, having travelled all the way on the one-sized track. What an historic moment for our nation. We're not ready to finish our journey just yet. Let's have one more ride on a steam train before we leave Western Australia. We've travelled 87 kilometres south of Perth to Pinjarra for our final steam journey. To the Hotham Valley Tourist Railway. Two W-class mountain-type steam locomotives are taking us on a spectacular run up the slopes of the Darling Ranges to Dwellingup, once the centre of a thriving timber industry in this region. It's from here that we're in for a real treat as we make our way to Etmilin through majestic forests of Kauri eucalypts and ancient cycads. And if you think this forest is beautiful in the daytime, just imagine what it's like at night. This is the Etmilin Forest Diner, and it's taking us for a very special dinner by moonlight. What better way to see such a wonderful place? And tonight we're really in luck. That moon is so bright that we almost don't need the special floodlights attached to the train. And just to top off this great occasion and this special journey we've been on together, why don't you let me serve you tonight?
Sweet and dry. There you go. Very good.